All right, we're back for another week of Feeling Cloudy with Sean and Scott. How are you, buddy?
I am great. I had an amazing week. How are you?
I had a long week, but you're very excited for somebody who it's not even 8 o'clock in the morning yet.
Yeah, I'm not a morning person, but I wake up for this. It's like golf. You know, I used to golf in my younger days, and I used to wake up at some ungodly hour to go golfing with my friends, and I wouldn't wake up for any other purpose that early. So this is my new golf.
Yeah, I remember growing up in Toronto, I played a lot of golf as well, and then they came up with night golf at Centennial Park. And I did that one time and chased a glowing ball around and just went, yeah, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is a daytime activity.
It's like there's some people who into October and November continue to golf. Like I bet you there's people that if there are courses that are open in December are still getting out there to golf, but it becomes hard to find the ball in the leaves and things, you know.
We have golf year round here. So the course at the end of my street, as you do, you have a 9-hole course at the end of the street you live at. It's open year round and people are playing all the time. And
that sounds terrible, man.
Tough existence here in Sydney.
Yeah.
So this week has been a big week, but before we get into that, we should thank our 5-star reviewer this week, Serge Aguev, whose name I probably just butchered.
Yes, Serge. We'll just say thank you, Serge. That was awesome for you to leave a 5-star review for the AWS Solutions Architect course.
Yeah, I thought I'd be an international man of mystery and completely butcher his name. Just see how we go.
That's on you.
Thanks, man. I'll take that one. Sorry, Serge. One of the things we talked about early on was trying this on Facebook Live, but I'm not yet ready for that. I think we'll keep trying this recording thing and see how that goes.
You know, this is our third episode, and I think it'll just get a little bit better every time, and then there'll reach a point at which we're confident to go live with it.
When we get to 2018, maybe we'll have a crack at that.
Yeah, when it's 40 degrees for you and minus 40 degrees for me.
I'll be sweating. It'll be great. It'll be awesome. Because you can't have fans or anything on because the mics pick up everything. So just me sweating. So what did you get up to this week? Any updates or changes to your courses or anything?
Yeah. This week we had this in November. There was this Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And so it's a reality of when you sell stuff online that these periods become increased activity and lots more students come in. So grateful. I think I added over 10,000 students in November. So appreciate to all everyone who joined one of my courses, including our AWS course in November. Back to work, like December 1, sitting down, recording new videos. And so I've been adding videos to my Azure courses. I had some student comments in my Facebook group about a particular student had started watching the videos and he felt it got too deep too quickly, like he was suddenly into the deep end of the pool. And so I thought that's a pretty clever observation, and I should probably try to make it a little bit more of a gentle incline as we get into the deep end. So I added some of those videos in between the intro and then let's start creating VMs. I watched the first hour of all my courses this week, and I'm still pretty happy with of how it's all looking. So color me happy.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting couple of days there where just people just joining. I mean, I think we added, because the AWS course was new. I think we had about 200 students heading into the weekend, and then we've now come out of that with double. So we've come out of that with about 400. So that's a pretty decent weekend for a new course like that. So especially because neither of us have courses that are related to Amazon already. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'm listen, this whole life of being a teacher has changed my life. So I am just so grateful for every person who's trusted us with the responsibility of teaching this AWS and Azure to them. So super grateful, and I'm just every day thinking about ways to make it better for people.
Yeah, I think we're going to do, I think we've agreed we're going to do some work in the next week or so of adding some new content to the AWS course, but also maybe looking at another style of course in that space. So hopefully by the next time we record this, we'll actually have some plans or something or we'll have actually done some of it. So that'll be good.
Yeah.
Did you have any student questions or anything you want to go over this week, or?
Well, I mean, I just mentioned I did have a student who made a comment about the course content. I continue to get questions about this. How do I get started into studying? It seems to be like a never-ending question. So I don't know. I might have to come out with a free course. Maybe we can talk about whether we want to do any kind of free AWS content, and that becomes the answer to how do I get started question. But yeah, I that's my experience this week was.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, like an intro to cloud computing. Maybe it covers both or something. I don't know.
Yeah, or like some of those concepts of like, how do you just start? Like, how do you, when you sit down at the computer and you're like, okay, I want to do this. You've made that decision. Step one, is it to start the videos? Like, do you just go and buy a course and sit down and, or do you have to like get yourself into some basics, underlying ideas of, because I do get students who are asking about cloud computing general concepts, and this is certification training, and there's still some underlying knowledge. So I did create a course before November. So in October, I created a general cloud concepts type course, and for both Azure, it also would include AWS, but it mostly focused on Azure. But it just seems like it's a general thing of like, what's the base level of knowledge you need to have before you consider getting in certification.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's actually a really worthwhile conversation we will have offline. But yeah, I think I do think you assume that when people dive into a certification level course, particularly, that they know exactly what they're looking for, but maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to learn.
Yeah.
They want to get on that roadmap and that path, but they're not there yet. So
yeah, it's a little bit like standing where you are and looking over at the highway and seeing how fast people are driving. And like, I want to get over there, as opposed to being on the road and just needing accelerant, So I kind of get there's many different facets to this journey. It's a very interesting discussion to me as well as to, like, it's not our job as teachers to take people and actually have to motivate them to get them to really want to get into this, because if they require our motivation, it's not going to continue once the videos are over, right? So there's lots of interesting learning concepts in terms of what we're doing, but yeah,
it was interesting. I think when you do this a lot, you start to take things for granted. So I was in a work related conversation this week around storage as a service, right? And you inherently, when you do this for any length of time, you learn the difference between block, object, and file storage. You just know the difference. You know what
right.
The use cases are. And I was dealing with somebody this week, and we were talking about a particular type of object storage. And he said, well, I don't understand. Why doesn't it do block? Well, that's not what it does. It's an object and file store. And when you're architecting large scale solutions, you do actually have to fundamentally understand some of these just concepts around, there's compute resource. And what is a compute resource? Well, it has, vCPU, it has VRAM, it has access to a network, and it's on and on and on. So yeah, definitely. I think I remember, I think I talked a little bit about last week. I remember when I started looking at the certification stuff. This would have been 96, 97, and looking at the MCSE, the early MCSE, in particular around the NT4 stuff. And I knew people who had never touched a server console who were studying to do that. And they thought server management was exactly the same as Windows 95 type stuff. And it just
Yeah.
it wasn't, right?
Right.
And so it was kind of, there are people who want to start what we maybe consider to be a little bit further along the path. And so how do you bridge that gap for them? That's an interesting conversation.
And there's nothing wrong. Like people have their own desires, right? So it's not for me to say, no, you have to go back to the back of the line.
Yeah.
You're not entitled. You haven't put your 2 years of service in to get to this point. It's not my, it's like we can't sit back and say no to people, right?
It is interesting. So it's obviously a slight tangent, but I had this conversation with somebody this week actually around a solution architecture problem. And we had we were having a problem with a particular solution we were putting together. And it was really the result of what we would call a technical consultant, somebody who's maybe one step above an engineer, but isn't quite yet at a solution architecture level. And it was kind of a mistake where this person just didn't have the experience and they hadn't done enough to know not to do something the way they had done it.
Yeah.
And I often refer to that as, well, this is, in this industry, we don't have apprenticeships.
No, this is learning.
Yeah, we learn live and and sometimes people who are good move ahead really fast, but apprenticeships are about experience, it's about the doing over time, not necessarily about just being good enough to move past being an apprentice. So it's interesting. You raise a good point. So
that's why we do this in terms of learning and teaching, right? So people teach themselves stuff.
And it's to help accelerate people, right? Some people just want to go faster. So, all right. So let's talk about some news. AWS had re:Invent this week. Massive, massive week of stuff.
Yeah. No, they announced an overwhelming amount of new things at AWS. And every day I was watching the news and it was like, really another 20 different things they announced today. So,
yeah, I have Feedly checking for AWS type news, and I have it sending me email alerts, and I just had to create a filter in Gmail. It was just like I don't have time this week. Off you go into the folder. So it was full on.
Right. Yeah, I go to this site called Hacker News, and it's like the top 8 stories out of 10 are all the AWS announcements. So it's like
So let's do this way. What was the thing they announced this week that you were most excited about?
Yes. Well, as soon as I heard about the camera that they announced, so there's this deep lens, it's called. It's a camera, and it's also got the machine learning chips and code built into it. So it's a camera that itself can be used for programming. It's like the self-driving car or the Roomba, where it can sort of see its path forward and be able to recognize those objects, do sort of hands-on learning through it. Connected with that are a bunch of other video related stuff. So they've got the recognition or recognition, because they spell it with the K, deep learning video analysis. And so to me, this is the when the robot overlords take over the future, they're going to be hooking into the deep lens and the recognition APIs. They're going to be able to recognize faces, objects, activities. Can you imagine if using an Amazon API, you could recognize if somebody is walking versus running versus sitting, like this? It just sort of labels these things. and then you can do, if your programs are tied into it, you can take certain actions. It's kind of like, I guess there's this Mevo camera that will follow you around. It recognizes your face and will focus on it and things like that. So that some of that technology is starting to make its way into technology that anyone can use.
It's fascinating. When I will start by saying that I look forward to our robotic overlords.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Put that out there.
Hi there.
Hail.
Yeah.
I was watching Punisher this week on Netflix, and there's an episode of that where this character Micro has access to all the CCTV footage, because that's what happens in the real world. Hackers get access to everything.
Yeah.
He had developed a program that did gait analysis, so it could tell somebody by their walking gait. And,
oh wow!
And what you just described is the camera and the AI could work out somebody running, and everybody has every person has a fairly distinctive walking gait. And so the idea that this Punisher episode, you look at it, you go, oh, that's science, sort of quasi science fiction. It's actually turning into quasi science fact, right?
Right. Yeah, that's always when you're thinking about CSI or something from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like the things that they were dreaming about. The writers of the show just dreamt up this idea is now, 2017, 18, more reality.
It's the Minority Report HoloLens, like Microsoft HoloLens, right? It's like, wow, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. What about you? What announcements out of AWS that made you excited?
There were a couple, but I'll start at a concept and then move backwards. So there were a lot of serverless announcements, like multiple serverless announcements. So you had, Fargate and Kubernetes with containers, and then you had, effectively they released this idea of what they call S3 Select and Glacier Select, where you can do SQL queries on objects in S3 and Glacier, which is kind of like a serverless database, which, by the way, they also announced a serverless database capability as well, just in case you weren't paying enough attention. So it was the serverless thing. I mean, I think it's coming from an infrastructure background. It's both exciting and fearful, right? Like I can't remember the concept of server management being so almost utterly unimportant as it is now.
Yeah, or I think part of this is a sales thing, right?
Course,
so they're trying to sell you on the, hey, don't even have to worry about scaling. Hey, don't even have to worry about CPU monitoring. So.
But at the same time, they released EC2 bare metal.
Yeah, it's
which is
they want their pie, they want a cake, and they want to eat the cake.
Well, they wait for their pie to be delivered. So that was the complete antithesis. But that's still pretty cool. The thing that we talked about last week was the KVM-based hypervisor that Amazon built and then hushed up. Well, they talked a lot. They talked a lot about it, in particular on the bare metal. And the other thing that they announced was they're building their own silicon for these things.
Okay.
To get improved storage and networking capability. They bought a company. I don't even want to try announcing the names. I think it's Apernin Labs or something like that, and it's basically produces the chipset. So they're now into that market as well.
That's just crazy. Like, why would you, if you're a services provider, like Amazon's basically just selling services, go buy your own chip maker? That's just like money to burn.
Well, yeah, I think they're squeezing out such small amounts of, they're having to squeeze out such small amounts now of performance to get a benefit that it makes sense in some respects to do it, but
profits.
Yeah, they have whatever that is silly number is 12 billion.
Well, they're trying to get this 1 penny lower on the cost per hour of EC2 instance.
Yeah, absolutely. So the serverless thing I found interesting and what it holds for the future, but then as you said, bare metal appears, so maybe it's not. So I had a second one, and my second one
Mhm.
was, which was interesting, was the Cloud9 browser IDE. I don't do a
Mm.
tremendous amount of development, but I find IDEs interesting. I think
Yeah,
it's fun technology, that stuff. And if you're not a developer, it's the integrated development environments, right? So it's your programming software effectively.
right.
And theirs is now browser based, and it has deep hooks into all the AWS platforms. So I think they're very clever in that Amazon has worked out that they need to make it an easier process for their development community to build services for them, rather than
Right.
just rely on, oh well, we have libraries and stacks and stuff, you just pull in our GitHub code and you're off. No, got to be a little bit better than that.
I will say Microsoft Azure has built-in IDE for uh, their functions product, and it's got obviously the code's going on, and then you just click a button and it runs some tests, and so you see on the sidebar tests that run for their Logic app product. You can run it. It's almost like a debug mode where it shows you the path that that particular run took through your conditional, and a Logic app has a lot of conditional elements. So, I mean, I was getting impressed with the way Microsoft was doing development in the cloud. Like, no, you're not just creating code on Visual Studio and uploading packages, but you're actually writing code in your browser within these types of serverless functions and Logic apps. And I guess Amazon, I'll say Amazon saw that and said, "Hey, that's cool. Let's get one too."
But at the same time, I mean, let's be blunt. Microsoft is the gold standard in development tools. Like Visual
Yeah,
Studio is that's it, man. That's the boss.
right. And Amazon is not known
Nah,
for its development tools.
Microsoft have been doing it for nearly 30 years properly. So in that
Yeah,
respect, you kind of expect them to be able to do it. But I was surprised that this fell out of the sky. So what else
yeah.
did you see that you thought was interesting?
So, yeah, one of the first announcements on the first day of reInvent was this Sumerian product, and looking at that, it's virtual reality, augmented reality, and 3D that apparently they say anyone can create 3D environments without programming expertise and without like graphical design expertise and modeling experience. They gave this example of school. I mean, think of it into the schools being able to create a 3D environment of their schools, and you can just sort of have learning happening online in a 3D environment. This reminds me so much of Second Life, by the way. I don't know why. Amazon, so they call it
Show your age
Sumerian.
now.
Yeah, they call it Sumerian, but it's Amazon Second Life, and you can build through drag and drop basically a 3D environment, and apparently so even for back in Second Life days, people were talking about it being the future of education, and IBM was renting Sims and putting like it's I remember IBM had what looked like the theater in the round, or those outside chairs where people could just sit around in a circle. I don't think it ever became much of anything, but
They invested. I remember you said IBM, and I just they invested millions into Second Life. Like,
yeah.
it's just one of those great IBM investments that had absolutely no sense behind it. But anyway, there you go.
So people have this idea, and I guess as we're getting into the hardware and the thing that the stuff that covers your eyes, the virtual reality, that you want a more immersive environment. So we just created a video product, HD video, 1080p video product for training on AWS. But for some reason, there's these futurists that think that you're going to want to wear something on your head and be able to turn your head around, and while you're learning how to do that.
I wrote about this not too long ago, right? Like, I think augmented reality makes a lot of sense. So you're driving in your car, you've got a heads-up display. Like, I have one now, but my Lexus has the speedometer on the windscreen. And
Yes, of course it does.
of course it does. And the new version, the new model, which I now, look at with envy and lust in my eyes, it has the map directions on the windscreen heads-up
Wow.
display as well.
Yeah.
And so and it's all in color as well, which
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
That's
And
military technology
that's
right
right.
there.
It's my
Yeah.
HUD, and so I kind of look at that kind of technology and think to myself, yeah, I like the augmented reality. I could see some of the phone stuff. So if I'm on my phone and I'm looking at Google Maps and the phone can bring up some stuff, I kind of get that. But this
Yeah.
idea that I'm going to wear like Google Glass or the silly Microsoft HoloLens things, and I'm going to wander around and do stuff. No, man, never going to happen. Just not for Sean.
Yeah. Well, you never say never, right? So we'll check back with you in a couple of years and
Yeah.
see what
Oh, look, if they inserted, now we're going science fiction again,
okay.
but if they inserted something in behind my eye that did all
Yeah.
that, like there's those TV shows that have that, like I'm all about that.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
I mean, I'm terrible with faces and names, and if I could see the name of a person as I'm at work or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's Bob, and that's
Yeah.
Alice. Done. Like I
Yeah.
would love that. That was
It's,
the dream of like the Google Glass with like the little
yeah.
piece of glass that you could look up to.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, except you look like an idiot. They didn't. That was just uncool. But we're starting to get into the. I don't know. Have you ever watched Black Mirror on Netflix?
My wife watched that, yeah. So got to see some of it.
Yeah, and
There
that.
was an episode, right, where your like clout or whatever would come up, and
Yep, that's
yeah.
it, man. It was.
Oh, you're a 9. You're
That's
too
it.
low for me. Yeah,
That's it. Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not high enough score. But
yeah,
that I would be all on that. Like, sign me up if you can put that straight into my brain.
yeah.
I'm in there because that's. But if I have to wear something on my face, no, I'm not really interested. Spoiling my good looks, as it were.
Yeah. True.
So what other stuff were you looking at that you thought was interesting out of reInvent this week?
Another interesting thing is in our course we talk about spot instances and the ability to bid on this compute power. So let's say you've got something that you would pay only so much for, and so you're like, well, I would love to have some compute power, but I don't want to pay full price for it. So you go in and you do these spot instances, which allows you to bid for it. This concept of being able to throw it into hibernation, and so Amazon's able to take the running environment, put that into a hibernated state, and then as the price rises, and then when the price dips back down to the spot, just to pick up where you left off, and you sort of like closing your laptop and you've got this pause going on, and then when you're ready to do it again, just to open it up. So I mean, that's just a tiny little thing, but I just think this whole concept of hibernation of spot instances is just sort of the next evolution of the spot technology there.
Yeah, no, it's it, I think you're going to see, this is an opinion, but I think you're going to see a lot more interesting capabilities around that hypervisor layer stuff as they develop their own hypervisor more, right? Because that's where the most gains exist for them. They can create functionality specific for that. Because one of the things that was also announced was VMware have added some new tools and things. So for the VMware instances on AWS, they've released some new migration tools and they've released some new disaster recovery tools.
Yeah.
And the reason that they can do that is because they control vCenter, right? So they control the vSphere. They control the hypervisor, and they can write, VDLIs that take care of a lot of that stuff. So so they have access to the underlying hypervisor. So they can do some clever stuff, and they have a huge customer base to do it with. So I envision that's where Amazon's going to go with this. And surprisingly, I mean, I look at Azure a bit every now and then. You look at it a lot, obviously, and I'm always surprised that Hyper-V has some interesting capabilities, and I'm always surprised that Azure doesn't adopt more of that stuff. It's kind of a strange one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, I guess, in terms of why AWS needs to get rid of the hypervisors that they use and create their own. But like you said, it's unlocking capabilities. If these open source projects or these other companies they don't control are creating things for them, then they want to go faster and they want to have unique capabilities that puts them above the competition. When you're running on open source products, you get the benefit of the group involvement, but you don't actually get the advantage of being first or being unique.
Well, also too, I think, AWS is talking a lot now with Intel. So Intel are going to start making custom firmware and chips for them, presumably. And if they can tailor their hypervisor to take advantage of what's in the silicon, it's advantageous. I remember when hypervisors really started coming, and the hardware manufacturers bought in early, and I think we're going to see another generational leap of that as the cloud market shakes out a little bit more, and so Amazon has such a footprint now.
Yeah.
And they're gonna start. I can see them getting into silicon in a big way. Like, I know we talked about the announcement, but I can see them getting into it big time now.
Yeah, I remember when Intel was the chip manufacturer, and now everyone and his brother makes their own chips.
Apple. I mean, Apple's doing their
Apple.
own.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of. That the whole ARM and now mobile, and I mean, Intel lost on a number of fronts, but we're getting
sidetracked
here. What did you think? Well, last week on the show we talked about the container services for Azure, especially how they were bringing out Kubernetes as their main thing. Now Amazon has Kubernetes as well, with their own managed containers. Did you have any thoughts on these containerized things that are?
I think it's definitely. I was talking to a client this week, and again, infrastructure guy, I get IaaS, I get infrastructure as a service. And I was talking to this client, and they were talking about multi-cloud and all kinds of stuff. And you just sit there and say to them, like, you don't want to be doing this yourself. You want to have containers and you want a container orchestration. You should go look at Kubernetes. Like, you just need to understand that. So I think bold prediction, but I think 2018 is going to be the year where this stuff actually starts to bite. I think right now it's a small portion of the market, really, in real terms. But I think in 2018, it's going to be one of those technologies, both serverless and containerization, where this is just going to bite. It's going to start taking off.
Yeah, I think people have been suffering some of the pain points for a little bit too long in terms of having to manage some of this stuff and running servers on their own and things like that. So this whole concept of the package itself containing everything that you need and being able to, there's a lot of benefits to containers. And yeah, I agree. I think it'll start to more and more become common practice, and running your own servers become the uncommon practice.
Well, I think it's also too, it slightly becomes generational, right? Like, I think we're still at the phase in the evolution where a lot of the people, both from an operational and an operational decision-making perspective, have a background in server management, really, like people like me, right? And where I've done that for 20 plus years.
So we're really excited about EKS. And now you've got two managed containers that you can choose from, ECS and EKS. And people are excited about that, but what we've heard from customers is managed containers makes our life much, much easier. Thank you very much. However, there's always a however, it would be great if we could run containers without having to worry about servers or clusters of these things. we thought, okay, well, we thought managed containers were pretty good, but that's interesting, running containers without managing servers. So we thought about that as a team. It's a tricky problem. We worked on that for the last year, and I'm excited to announce a new capability called AWS Fargate, which allows you to run containers without having to manage servers or clusters.
So now that we're back, I was talking about how, there's a transitional change happening where people who are historically managed infrastructure are starting to move out of that. And we're getting people now who have no background in physical servers and managing infrastructure. I talked to a guy this week. He was he truly worked in managing Cisco UCS servers, and he had never stepped foot into an actual data center. He'd never gone into one. And he said, I just do it all remotely. I don't actually have to go there and touch stuff. And it's like, yeah, but you've never been in those cold, loud rooms. How have you avoided that? And he said, it just never came around. So, so I think as people, that change happens and people start to have a background in containers, they'll feel less clingy to the blinking lights and whizzing disks, and containers will take over.
It's almost like there's two types of jobs where before used to just be like the IT department, and then they managed the servers. You told them to deploy something. They went and did it. Something went wrong. I can remember not even 10 years ago, something going wrong, being in the back room with the IT guys, and they've got racks and racks and racks, and I'm sitting there working the console trying to diagnose what's going on. It seems like this job is being bifurcated, where you've got the people who manage the hardware and the networking and the actual wires, and then you got the people who configure that as a separate role, a separate skill set on top of that.
It's interesting. That change is fascinating, right? So my son would have been, it would have been 2006, and he had just turned, he'd be 3 at that point. And on Christmas,
and he installed an NT4.
That was amazing.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was Christmas Day, and I was running a managed services company at the time for my employer. And we would almost call it a cloud company now. We provided services like that, and got an alert from our service desk that one of the robotic libraries had died. And so I bundled this little 3-year-old up on Christmas Day, drove to our data center, put the little the muffs on him so he wouldn't go deaf, and sat him on the floor of this cold room while I rewired a fiber channel robotic controller for tape library in an hour, right? Just it was easier for me to go do it than to bring in one of the staff on Christmas, right? I was being Santa Claus for the staff. But people don't do that anymore. But like I was talking to somebody this week, why would you buy a robotic library? Just use Glacier. And so, but
the other thing too is even 10 years ago, people would talk about Google, and they'd say Google has 1 million servers, and at any one time, like 10,000 of them could be dead, but nobody cares. Nobody goes to investigate why server number 999.37371 is not working, because they've got so many that the individual parts die, and they just leave them.
Yeah.
And the fabric of Google just operates around the dead servers.
And that happens now. That's common now, right? So I was working with a client. We're putting together a large-scale private cloud solution for this company. And part of the solution will be that they'll have so much physical capacity that when a server dies, the change window is once a week. So once a week, there will be people who will go into the data center, and like on a reclamation project, they'll take these things out of racks, they'll replace them with new ones, plug it all back in, and the fabric will just, the bus will just have more compute availability. So it's amazing. But the other thing that's interesting is how I think around AWS, they've broken it down into you have solution architecture, which is important. You have SysOps, which is important, and you have DevOps, which is important. but
Right.
you don't have tech ops anymore. There's no need. So the guys who did tech ops for a living, who did
Yeah.
the wiring and the cabling, and when something failed, they'd replace a drive, and they do it. It's all gone. Those days are done.
Well, that's what you're paying Amazon for, really.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
even gone now in enterprise. Like,
Yeah.
very rarely, do
If you love that stuff, you've only got fewer and fewer companies that would willing to hire you.
Oh, and you see companies now, right? They have some that have their own data centers. A lot still do, and what they do is they just have managed services contracts with the vendors, and the Dell guy goes out and swaps out the drive. You never even look at it. Like,
Wow.
your drive and your server fails, the light on the front of the server will blink so the guy knows which server has failed, and he just swaps the disk out, and you don't even go to the data center anymore. So
Right.
so those tech ops guys, those days are done. So sysops and DevOps, that's the future. And
yeah. So that was I don't know. That was reinvent, I guess.
yeah, no, and there's probably a dozen different things we didn't talk about because it was, I guess when you have a week-long event, you have to talk about something. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, all the keynotes and all the breakout sessions and everything like that.
Yeah, so that was good. What else do we have? Anything else, or are we good now?
I mean, we can. Amazon's coming out with their new M5 instance type, which is the next generation of the general instance. The M that we all know and love. So there's also a new H1 instance, which is, they said, optimized for I/O, but there's so many different instances that are already optimized for compute, optimized for I/O that I'll have to look into specifically why H1 is much better. They're talking about magnetic disks, so this is sort of optimized around log processing, data processing, big
All
data.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. I didn't really look at that, but spinning disk still has kind of a place because it's cheap, but I think the days are numbered. So
yeah. Well, the only advantage is the size. You can get a bigger capacity for a spinning disk than you can for flash in the different cloud vendors.
Yeah, so things like data lakes and stuff are great for spinning disk. And interestingly, Amazon talked a lot about data lakes this week. I watched a few sessions, and they were talking a lot about it. And and obviously, big, plentiful, cheap spinning disk is great for that kind of solution where performance is it's less relevant than actually just copious amounts of storage. So yeah. So that was another one, is new instant types. There's always new instance types. That's just kind of the thing. It's like you go to the shopping center and there are more T-shirts, just different T-shirt sizes on the racks, man. That's
They also talked about this T2 instance where there's unlimited high performance for any period of time. It's I guess they limit the performance on most of the instance types to the promised size, but this T2 is just, they call it unlimited.
Yeah, so you get, the way it works is you get high performance, you get shares effectively, and when you use your shares, you're not guaranteed them anymore. So you don't get the top clock speed that you think you're going to get all the time. You get an allotment of that, and if you have a noisy neighbor or something next to you, you might not be able to get all, or you might get what you're assigned but no more. So this is kind of, I guess, like a reservation at that level, which is interesting. So it's that's actually one of the fascinating things for our solution architects out there. That is something to look into, is that around particularly the T instances and things like that, you need to learn, if you have an application or something that you're going to run on Amazon, you need to understand what your performance metrics and characteristics are pretty closely, because you may not be getting what you think you're getting, and so therefore you'll be wondering why you're CPU bound. There's a lot of documentation around that. Maybe I'll try and dig some out and find some notes around it. We'll attach it somewhere in some show notes in the Facebook group.
Sure, to the Feeling Cloudy group.
Yeah, feelingcloudy.com/FB for those of you who want to join.
Right. Links below.
Yeah, that's right. Links below. And we'll put the notes in there. I'll dig them out in the next day or so. But I had a client 2 years ago who this was a real issue. And one of the solution architects in our team ran the math. And it when they started trying to figure out how many instances they would need to get to their compute requirements, it skewed it to be more expensive than on-premise. So it was an interesting mathematical simulation that had to be run. So
yeah, these companies, they try to couch these terms in terms of like how much CPU and how much memory you get, but really it's they don't promise the performance. They just
no, it's
interesting.
I mean, I say it a lot, but I had a conversation with a client this week around this very thing. When you are investing in a platform where you're not taking the risk on the infrastructure, then you have to assume that it's arbitraged. And so therefore you're not going to get a reservation unless you pay for it. Right. And if you pay for it, it's expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the benefit. The benefit of cloud is ability to not be paying when you don't need something. And the cost of that is not having everything that you need, or the price basically when you absolutely need something. So it's a give and take on that.
I mean, I could talk a bit about Neptune, which is the new graph database. If you're into large scale relationship mapping, that's a really unique. I've actually had a project about 3 or 4 years ago that was based on that needed a graph database, which was interesting. But yeah, it's a pretty unique thing. But Amazon's just filling out the portfolio, right?
Yeah. What we're seeing is the trends in technology over 2018 and beyond. The machine learning, big data, all of these sort of Kubernetes and containers. They're going to do a lot of changes and investments along those paths.
What we should do is either next week or maybe the week after or something, we should do a prognostication episode where we talk about what we think the trends for the next year will be.
Reading the cards.
That's it. I reckon those are always good fun, but I reckon we should do one of those because it's it'll be fun, but also it's interesting it gives us that time. We have to research stuff, which is good.
This is a good time of year to be thinking about next year. I'm gonna have to order a hat off of Amazon real quick. One of those
Make America Great Again hats.
Wow, I should get one of those too. But and send it to you.
Yeah.
But no, remember Johnny Carson used to have this he was
the Swami hat.
Yeah, the Swami hat.
Yeah.
So
now we're showing our age again. We're talking about Johnny Carson.
Yeah, we'll see what that goes for.
Yeah. Any other news that isn't Amazon related that you're interested in?
That isn't Amazon related. Well, I mean, I saw something passed this week that someone released an open source project on GitHub that can actually discover new S3 buckets. It basically there's a system, and I'm just finding out about it, called the certificate transparency. And this concept is as different machines on the internet find SSL certificates, they report them to a central repository, and this is supposed to protect the certificate system from people registering to google.com as their own certificate and instead of the official google.com certificate. So having a central repository of certificates allows you to monitor for spoofing. But some clever person has said, well, this is where a lot of S3 buckets are going to get registered. So they're monitoring the certificate transparency for as people are discovering S3 buckets, and they can find the ones that are open and open and free. So as we were talking last week about open buckets, now someone's come out and said, hey, why don't we just have a GitHub project where you can just watch as new open buckets get created and see what people put in them.
Oh dear.
That is Amazon related, but it's I found it.
Why can't people use their talents for good instead of evil?
I know. And it's funny, the guy on the GitHub project said, please use this responsibly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
And he also had the advice of don't name your S3 bucket after your company name. Give it a random letters and numbers instead of,
great.
Very
helpful.
Yeah, U.S. military / private.
Yeah,
right. Don't name your bucket.
Yeah. IRS.com.
Yeah.
And then
/ tax returns.
That's right. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. I think it was a pretty quiet week for everything cloud related that wasn't named AWS.
Oh, everyone just got out of the way this week. Yeah.
Stay out of the way.
Yeah.
So I think on that note, we'll probably wrap up then, because we've talked a long time about reInvent and new features and functionality. So
yep.
So we're back
week.
We're back next week. We're gonna turn up. Maybe not next week, but definitely one of the coming weeks. We will do our predictions for 2018. But
okay.
So you start thinking about it now. If you want to get in touch with us in the interim, join the Facebook group, feelingcloudy.com/FB. If you want to take our AWS Solution Architecture Associates course, it's feelingcloudy.com/AWS-SAA. That's over on udemy.com.
Mm-hmm.
And softwarearchitect.ca to get to our friend Scott here. Is that right?
Yeah. Software. I'm repping the swag today, so I got wearing my own stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna have
still waiting.
I'm gonna have to get some swag made now just to compete with you.
Well, yeah, we're still waiting for someone to say that they're going to send us some mugs. So I'm Star Wars repping today, but actually, isn't the new Star Wars movie coming out in 2 weeks? Yeah, I guess not next episode, but the episode after. Looking forward to that. Softwarearchitect.ca. I've got also links to our Twitter accounts if you guys want to tweet at us or whatever below us in this video. So, that's all for now.
That's it. All right, man. I'll see you next week.
All right, Sean. Take care.
Bye.